Alex Noonan from Noonan Labs here, and I was feeling idle and decided to brush up on my economics analysis skills, as one does. For those of you that aren't familiar with my lore, when The Big Short came out, it was a really impactful movie for me because as a data person, the idea that like you can see a pattern before everybody else and that'll give you an edge uh, in trading or whatever is a pretty appealing story. I have since learned that that isn't really the case. Um, but anyway, the Federal Reserve is always putting out cool research, and their data is easily accessible. Economists are probably the wildest when it comes to data transformation and applying those towards models. And you'll see that in the social sciences in general, as they need to be creative to torture the data and get some financial insights. And I found that occasionally, if you venture outside the domain you're most comfortable with and try and learn those analytics skills, you'll pick up some things that you can bring back to your domain. And it's a pretty powerful exercise. So I attempted to replicate their paper on the Financial Conditions Index, which tracks the general trend of financial conditions in the US and whether they are tightening or loosening. And this was a fun exercise and utilized several techniques that up and coming analysts should be familiar with, such as time series analysis, hitting REST API endpoints, window functions, filters, joins, and data frame multiplication, and finally visualizing the end result of those transformations. Something like this, you would most likely need to use a statistical processing language, and replicating in a business intelligence tool or in a spreadsheet would be pretty tedious and would be difficult to fully automate. So I'll go through my process at a high level and then overview some of the key aspects in the code. So for the financial conditions index, there's 7 different time series that contribute into it. With those, they are grouped by interest rates, whether they are an index tracking housing or the equity markets, or an index tracking the relative strength of the dollar. And depending on the grouping of these series, you have to apply different logic in order to get the right transformation that feeds into the model. From there, we merged those together, and then for the paper, they published some weights that you need to adjust for the look back period so you can get a final number when you sum them together, as some of these series are more important than others. And once you do that, you get the final number at the end. We are in the collab notebook. These are the dependencies I'm importing. I'm also authorizing my Google account to save the final output data to a Google Sheet. So that's what's happening here. And then I'm also reading in a font file because the default font for the matplotlib is kind of gross. So since we're doing financial data, we're going to use Garamond as is tradition. And then this cell right here is the kind of meat of the whole analysis. And yeah, I could have refactored a lot of this into some functions, but no need to do that when something already works. So for this first series, this is the high yield rate over time. So what we're doing here is we're hitting the API endpoint for this series, pulling the observations out, dropping unnecessary columns, doing some date type or data type conversions, and then we want to set the index as the date, sort it properly, and then we need to calculate the 90-day average of this yield to get to smooth it out a little bit. And we're also pulling out the month, day, year as individual columns. And then we are grouping by year and month and finding the max day in that month that we can then use to calculate the difference from 3 months ago as outlined in the paper. And then finally, I am setting the date column to be the last day of that month. So when we join everything together, everything is consistent and all lines up because for this model, we're working with monthly data. And you can look through this at your leisure, the different processes for each. It's pretty repetitive. And then we get to the cleanup section, which is outlining the values we need to put into the wait function. When I first did this, I wanted to find what is the minimum observation date we have for each series, so we can figure out how far back we can go to construct the financial conditions index. We ended up finding that April 2014 was the minimum value for that. So here I am filtering all the data frames for that value. And then I'm dropping the unnecessary columns and merging them all together. And finally, the function returns the merged data frame that we can use for analysis. And here we are using the weights that we need to calculate for the 3-year look back window. And here's the function that takes in the window and the specific variable. And these all, the column names match up to the weights here. And here is applying another one of those window functions in SQL syntax, but using pandas to apply the weights so we can get the value that we then sum in to get the final financial conditions index. And here are some of those values, and this is kind of what the final data frame looks like. And then this is the main chart. And as you can see, we had some tightening going up last year, and then this year we've been loosening. And when you're looking at this, it's like, okay, cool. So you would expect to see, I don't know, COVID kind of messed up a lot of these economic time series for kind of obvious reasons. So it's kind of difficult to tell whether it'll be a recession or not. Kind of feels like one, but who knows? And more interestingly is like a stacked chart of how these individual contributions kind of change over time. And kind of no surprise there that the equity and housing market and the mortgage rates are pretty big impacts to this. Because as you would expect, housing is a big part of our economy, and everybody loves stocks as we're quite financialized as well. So those things kind of the tail wags the dog, so to speak. And I was kind of surprised that the government bonds and the dollar were kind of ancillary, but those definitely impact the other variables, and all these things tend to work together, as you don't really see a lot of instances where you have a lot of up and down movement. And then finally, we're dumping all this into a spreadsheet, and that's about it. Yeah, if you have any questions or want to reach out, my link to my Twitter or LinkedIn is in the description. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any updates.